Stoke, and welcome back to the Hungarian Heritage Podcast, Season 4. It means so much to have you here with me again, and if this is your first time tuning in, I'm so glad that you're here. This podcast has always been a journey, not just through Hungarian people, places, food, and culture, but through the heart of what connects us all, our stories, our memories, and the pride we carry in who we are and where we come from. This season, I'll be introducing you to new friends and revisiting familiar voices who share a passion for preserving and celebrating Hungarian heritage. Together, we'll reflect on how traditions are preserved and how our Hungarian identity evolves and how we can pass this rich culture to the next generation so it doesn't just live in the past, but thrives in the future. Each episode will continue to reflect the flavors passed down through generations to the stories that carry our pride and history. Some stories will make you laugh, others might bring a tear to your eye, but all of them will reflect the beauty of what it means to be part of the Hungarian experience. I am filled with enthusiasm and honor to continue this journey with all of you as we connect the circles of Hungarians around us and make this community, Hungarian heritage, stronger than ever. Please join me in welcoming Suzanne Ócsai to this episode of the Hungarian Heritage Podcast. She is here to tell us all about her art, her professional position in the art world, and also her connection between her art and her Hungarian heritage. Suzanne, thank you so much for being here today. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Christine. It's great to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. I had the privilege of meeting you when your newest art exhibition was being, what's the proper art term, displayed, shown, gallery opening at the American Hungarian Foundation, where, as many of you know, I help out there. I'm on the board. So I'm fortunate enough that I get to see Suzanne's art so often, and I'm so happy about that. But I'm going to let her tell you all about that a little bit later. First, it is customary that we always start with our guests' Hungarian heritage. So Suzanne, tell us a little bit about your Hungarian heritage. Who's Hungarian in your family? What part of Hungary did they come from? Do you have a favorite food that you like to eat? Tell us all about that.
So my dad was Hungarian. He passed away a few years ago. And that was my connection to my Hungarian heritage. When I was little, my grandparents came over and visited for a year with my uncle. So I started out really connected as a young child. I think I was 2 years old when they came and I was 3 when they left. And I remember begging to go home with them. I loved them so much, especially my grandmother. I was very close to her and I wanted more of that connection. I had cousins in Hungary, but obviously, my parents didn't let a 3-year-old go back to Hungary with her grandparents. And that was kind of the end of my really strong connection. Other than that, my grandmother came when I was 8 years old, and then my grandfather came separately when I was 19 years old, and they only stayed a couple months during the summer. And so other than that, I didn't grow up with a Hungarian community around me, unfortunately, even to the point where my dad never taught me how to say my last name properly until I was 20 years old. And I met cousins from Hungary when they were visiting the States. And they're like, that's not how we say it. We always just said Ócsai. Hungarians will know that there's actually an accent over the O and it's Ócsai and it's not Ócsai. There's no chai in the name. And so I felt so disconnected in that way where I didn't even know how to say my own last name. And my dad wasn't a huge stickler. We lived in the rural South. And so his name was Tibor. He went by, that's his middle name. His first name is Bela. But because of where we lived, and one time my mom loves to tell this story about somebody who called the house and they were really, really angry because they said that they found this number of a woman named Bella in their husband's pocket. And when my mom answered the phone, they chewed her out. And so my dad was like, oh, I can't go by Bela anymore. I got to go by Tibor. And then Tibor became Tibor and T-Bone and all these different things. So my dad just kind of let it slide. He wasn't a huge proponent of correcting people.
Sure.
Because it was too much trouble. And I kind of understand that. When I was writing my grad school thesis where I wrote about home, belonging, and identity, I write these 2 poems. And one is how I feel when somebody that I don't know gets my name wrong and how I feel when somebody who I do know gets my name wrong. And I feel completely different in the two situations. Like, I don't care if a stranger gets my name wrong. It's more difficult for me to have to teach them how to say my name. But then if you're somebody that's close to me, I would like you to put in the effort to say my name correctly.
Of course, at least over time, that should be something that develops in a friendship. To your point, with your dad not correcting people about his name, I feel like it's very connected to how many immigrants, Hungarian or other, feel because, they're trying to also assimilate,
Mhm.
at least in the United States, to the American culture. And if that helps to not correct and let your name morph into something that's, I guess, more American,
Yeah.
that happens, I imagine, a lot. So but that's a very funny story, though, about someone
Yeah.
finding your dad's name in the pocket.
Along with where my family is from, my dad was born and raised in a little town in eastern Hungary called Gyula. And it's a wonderful little town. I love to go back and visit there. I feel like it is the vacation city of
Oh,
Hungary a little bit. There is a beautiful castle, the Almaty Castle. There's also like a spa, like they have a thermal bath there as well. So he grew up there. He was born in 51, and so he was, he lived through the revolution of
mhm.
56. He was affected directly by that time period. His babysitter joined the resistance and was killed by the Soviets. And so when that happened, my dad made this decision. He was 5 years old, and he made this decision that he didn't want to live in Hungary anymore, that he was going to leave one day.
Wow.
And he kept that promise to himself in his 20s when he escaped, lived in a refugee camp in Italy for about a year, and then got a visa to go to Switzerland. A lot of his friends were in Switzerland. And so he applied for a visa to Australia and Switzerland. And his faith was very important to him, and so he prayed, and he said whichever one came first, that was the country he was gonna go to, and the Swiss visa came in the morning, and the Australian visa came in the evening, and so he was like, "Well, I guess that's it," and then he would come to the States and travel with his friends, and on one of those trips, he met my mom, and they didn't get together right away, it was a while later, but anyways, that's a whole different story.
That's so isn't it amazing how, like, a five-year-old experiences those things? Because we think of five-year-olds now, and I couldn't even imagine, like, when my children were 5 that
Yeah.
they had to experience that or make that decision that, like, "Oh, one day I'm gonna leave." That's a very adult decision, but I'm sure my father was also 7 or 8 when that happened as well, and they were in a refugee camp, and, like, those are things that children shouldn't have to see, and I'm sure that affected my dad and your dad for the rest of their lives, tucked back in the
100%.
corner of their brains, so and it is true, you basically went wherever your visa came up, so I'm not sure a lot of people realize that, but it's pretty interesting. So, wow, so you had that intermittent connection, you said when you were younger, but it definitely blossomed a little bit more when you became a little older. Can you tell us about that with your cousins in Hungary?
Yes. When I was 20, my cousins came to the United States for a trip. Their dad worked for an organization that would bring him every 5 years to the United States for meetings. And so every time that happened, he would bring his whole family. And I knew they were coming and I was going to be at the same location. And so I looked them up and they didn't know I existed. I just kind of like popped in and was like, "Hi, I'm your cousin. My name is, Ócsai." And they're like, "That's not how we say it." So they taught me how to say our last name
Yeah.
properly. And when that happened, I was about 20 years old and I was wanting to get more connected. I had just seen my grandfather for the last time in the United States. I then went later and saw him in Hungary, but I had just seen him for the last time in the United States. And I was going to college at that time. I was meeting some people who had Hungarian heritage, not many, because there's not a lot in Tennessee, but I was feeling very disconnected. My other side of the family is Hispanic. I wasn't connected with that culture either. And so I didn't feel very grounded in any sort of culture or ethnicity. I wasn't Southern. I
Mhm.
wasn't from the deep South, even though I was born there. I wasn't very Southern. And I was at a very diverse school. And so there was all of these cultures around me. And I was just like, I don't look like anybody exactly. Like I kind of could fit in with I'm very ambiguous. I can fit in with a lot of different cultures, but I don't know my own and I don't have any connection to that. And so that's where kind of that desire started to grow. And I became friends with the few Hungarians that were on campus. And we would like call each other like Hungarian cousins because I was just trying to connect. And then later, I got connected to another Hungarian cousin in Hungary. Her name is Angela, and she and I are basically like twins. We're a year apart. Exactly a year apart, born the same month, a year apart. And she's very artistic. She has brown hair. She loves music. She has like a master's degree also in art history. I don't have mine in art history, but we both have master's degrees in the arts. And we connected over Facebook and just became best friends. And a year later after that, I went and visited my grandfather for his 94th birthday. And we met. She was the first person that I saw when I got off the plane. She met me in Budapest. And we have been so close ever since. And that's when the first time I went back to Hungary, I started getting really close to my cousins and building that relationship up even more. And I think the biggest compliment that I've ever heard from one of my family members is Angela, when we were on the train riding around Budapest after she picked me up, I was reading a word in Hungarian and I didn't exactly know what it meant. And so I was like sounding it out. And she was like, that is perfect pronunciation. And I was like, what? Really? Like, that's incredible. Not that I say all words properly, but it felt so good because I had heard the language in the house, my dad on the phone with his parents my entire life. And so I picked up on some of the pronunciations and I was familiar with how to make the sounds, even if I didn't know what the words meant. That was, I think, the beginning of me feeling like I might actually really be Hungarian inside me.
It's amazing. Like that was just like a positive trigger for your feeling of connectivity. And it is true. I'm not a linguist, but the things that you hear really do as a child really do help form your language. So I can definitely pronounce things and people are like, "Oh, your pronunciation is so good," but it's because I heard it when I was
Yeah.
so often. So that's pretty great. And now you've connected to this Hungarian side of your family in Hungary, and it was probably the connection that you were looking for all of your life. And I have
Yes.
like a similar situation. I feel like we talked about this, that, we have very similar things about our Hungarian connectivity, and like they're really important. It's amazing how your cousin Angela is very similar to you. So DNA is pretty amazing, right? That even though you're not in the same location on the globe, you can have very similar things happen in your life. It's just part of your DNA. So,
Yeah.
so even though your Hungarian connection was intermittent, you still were able to get to a point where now you feel like you have that connection, although it doesn't solve the problem of being in school and not feeling like you had either the Hispanic or the Hungarian connection as strong as maybe some other people had with their heritages. But I think that things come to people at different times, and what's meant for you won't pass you. I heard that expression recently, and it really is true. Maybe you just weren't at the right time in your life for that to happen, and now you are. Before we talk about your Hungarian influenced artwork, art is part of your entire life. And you live and breathe art all day long, and you work in the art industry. So tell us all about that. Tell us about your passion. Did you start loving the art world when you were younger? How did you get to where you are now as a professor? So tell us that.
When I was 3 years old, I told my mom I wanted to be an artist. And at the time, I thought that meant I couldn't pronounce author, and I wanted to be a writer as well.
Okay.
My dream as a child was to write and to draw. And so all day I was just, scribbling on pieces of paper and being like, "Mom, read this." And she's like, "I can't read that. That's not really what you think it is. That's not cursive, darling." And then I was always drawing these abstract pieces. And so I always knew from the time I was a child that I wanted to draw. I wanted to be an artist and I wanted to be a writer as well. And so in college, that's exactly what I pursued. I did a degree in graphic design and art with a minor in journalism. And then for grad school, I did an MFA in creative nonfiction. And so I pursued that from the very beginning, except, for like when I was 11 and everybody at that time was going through like, we want to be a vet stage.
Right.
Besides that, I always
Or like a pop star.
exactly. Yeah, there was a little bit of that in there, but
Yeah,
it was
of
always
course.
consistent with art and writing. So I pursued that, and I also knew as a teenager that I wanted to be a teacher. I had read, I think it was Ron Clark's 55 Essential Rules, and
I read that too.
I know, it was great.
Oh, this is like a whole separate podcast episode,
Mhm.
but oh my goodness, that was so influential into my teaching and what I did in my classroom. But sorry.
So I knew I wanted to be a teacher. Loved his model. Not that I like stick to his model. College is a little bit different, but
Sure.
I loved his model and how much he cared about his students. And I knew I wanted to be a teacher, but I also knew I wanted to teach college because I wasn't like, I think kids are great. I worked at Girl Scouts and I love supporting children, but I wanted to teach at a different level. I was an only child, so I wasn't around a lot of kids, and so I was like, I don't really know what to do with children.
Okay. I mean, I feel like we have a preference. I like all children, just like you said, but I always preferred middle school and higher. So that was really what I liked better. That didn't mean that I don't like, little kids. I enjoy being around little kids, but I don't necessarily want to tie shoes all day and things
Yeah.
like that. So, I wanted to be able to employ some of the essential 55 tactics in my classroom and things like that, which was great. So fantastic. So now tell us where you currently are a professor, because it's not where you grew up in the South. Tell us where you are now.
I live in Lincoln, Nebraska now, which is about 15 hours from where I grew up in Eastern Tennessee. And I came out here because I got a job offer right out of grad school, which was amazing. I feel like that's sometimes a little bit rare to find in academia. And I jumped at the opportunity. It was a school that some of my friends had gone to.
Oh, wow.
Union Adventist University here in Lincoln, Nebraska. And as soon as I got here, it just felt like it was where I was supposed to be, not only on campus, but in the community as well. Lincoln has an incredible art scene and art community, and the artists here are incredible. The artists here are so welcoming and encouraging, and it was within my first year of being here, I was encouraged by a friend to get a studio. So I got a studio at the Burkholder Project, which is a local like artist collective. It's a gallery here, but it's also an artist collective. They have studios that you can rent. They have wall space that you can rent. There's also galleries inside it. They also have artist lofts where you can actually like live in the gallery, which is so cool. One of my friends lives there. It's so wonderful being an artist there because the directors are incredibly encouraging. They have from like when I walked in the door, I didn't know what I was going to do with the gallery. I didn't consider myself a fine artist. I was a commercial artist. I did graphic design. That's what I studied. That's what I teach. And they had a group show, a landscape group show. And I joined in like June, and this was in September. And so all of the artists are welcome to submit a piece. And if they like the piece, they'll put it up on the wall in the show. And so I brought a piece from my collection of Hungarian photographs that I had taken when I was in Hungary back in 2018 to visit for my grandfather's funeral. And the piece was a landscape of Budapest. When I took the photo, I was standing at the top of the art gallery on the Buda side, and I was looking down over the Duna or the Danube, the Duna as we call it, at the parliament and the bridges and everything. And so you see Pest from the Buda side. And it's one of my favorite photos. I think it's still like the header photo on my Facebook, like since 2018.
Right.
I've never changed it. And I submitted it, and it sold on the opening night of the show. And that was such an incredible moment. Just getting it, like I cried after I dropped it off and they said that they would put it up in the show. I cried on the way back to my office because there had always been a part of me that wanted to be an artist, I knew I was an artist,
Right.
because I went to art school
Sure.
but
Professionally, you're an
right,
artist, right? But you wanted
right.
to have your own things out there for people.
Right, exactly. All of the work that I had really done had been commercial.
Right.
I hadn't really done non-commercial work. And so this was the first piece that was considered like fine art that I had not only put out into the world, but I had also sold. And it was tied back to my Hungarian heritage and my
Yeah.
experience.
So you hit all of the important buttons there for yourself. Congratulations, by the way. That must have
Yeah.
been was that like a little turning point for you with your
Yes.
art? So I don't want to spoil it. So you tell us how that happened.
Yeah, that was 100% a turning point. I entered the next group show, and my piece that I entered there sold as well. It wasn't anything connected to my Hungarian heritage, but it sold as well. And I was like, you know what? I might be able, there might be something here. Like, I might need to,
Right.
really be serious about this. And so after my first piece had sold, the gallery director invited me, or the gallery owner invited me to have a solo show the next year, which was just incredible for me. I didn't imagine ever having a solo show. Like, I knew that that was a possibility by being an artist by being at the gallery, but I was a studio artist, which means it was a little different than being an associate artist. So there's
Okay.
two kind of tiers at the gallery. One, you just rent a studio space and you can kind of create whatever you want.
Okay.
The other one, you have to submit a body of work that then goes on display. And so they have to approve it. And if they like your work, then you get to be. So it's a little,
Right.
there is a application process and a review process. And so I hadn't gone through that. And so to still be invited to show my work felt like a huge privilege and honor. And I knew what I wanted to do. I wanted to create a body of wire sculpture. So the previous summer, right before I had gotten the gallery, or right before I had gotten the studio at the gallery, I had gone to Hungary. My father had died the previous year, and I went there kind of to mourn, to be with family and be in his country and just sit with his memory. I really wanted to. I took a week. I'm not Jewish, but I really appreciate kind of the concept and the idea of having a week long
Shiva, and you're really
Yes.
recalling all the things about the person
Mhm.
to celebrate their memory.
Yes. And so I did that. I went and visited his best friend in his city in Jula, and I was in Budapest with my cousins. And so I really wanted to take this time, and I really should have taken more time, to be completely
Yeah.
honest, but I didn't have more time to take.
There's never enough time when you're
I
in
know, there is
Hungary.
never
Whether
enough.
it's a week, 2 weeks, there's always time for more.
Yeah. During that time, however, leading up to that trip, I had been encouraged by a faculty member to submit a grant for my time in Hungary to somehow work in a research component. And I wasn't really sure what I was going to do, but I did some research and I discovered an artist named István Orosz, and he's a writer and a graphic designer and a fine artist. A lot of his work is inspired by M.C. Escher. And so he's just this phenomenal, multifaceted artist. He was also born the same year my dad was born. So they were the same age.
It was meant to be that you met him. Right?
Yes. And he had been a founder of the Hungarian poster group known as the DOPP in Hungary. And that group of designers during communism had designed posters that kind of had some double entendre. Their core was promoting freedom of political thought. And that was something that was very important to my father also, was freedom of thought. To be able to choose how you believe, to be able to choose how you think. And that was something that wasn't necessarily allowed during communism in Hungary. You kind of had to toe the party line. And my father would always talk about how you couldn't ever say anything. You couldn't trust anybody. You couldn't trust your neighbor. You couldn't trust your friend. You said anything against the government, it could be, you could be disappeared the next day, or you could go to jail. And as I was talking to Mr. Orosz, he shared that a family friend had turned in his father. His father had gone to jail, and that was something that he personally had experienced. And when I came back, he gave me a tour of his alma mater, which was the MOME, the Moholy-Nagy University of Art and Design in Budapest, Hungary. So he gave me a tour of Moholy-Nagy University of Art and Design, MOME. And it was just incredible experience to see what Hungarian artists were doing. And I got to meet a lot of the leaders at the school during the tour. And when I came back, I felt like not only had I been given this incredible opportunity to work as an artist, as a professor,
Right.
um, and also connect with professors and artists in what I consider, one of my countries. I am a citizen. I got
Yeah.
my citizenship in 16. And so I've been able to connect with art on both sides of the ocean in both continents and both countries. And I really wanted to honor that and bring it into my own artistic practice. I'd been wanting to be a fine artist and establish myself as a fine artist for a long time, specifically within wire sculpture. I started designing wire jewelry back in 2016, right before I actually got my citizenship in Hungary. And all of that time, I'd been wanting to delve into larger wire sculpture. And so when I came back from Hungary and meeting him, I knew I wanted to specifically incorporate motifs from my Hungarian heritage into my artwork. And I started doing little sketches in my notebook and really kind of planting the seeds. And they just grew slowly over the next 6 months. And when I was offered that opportunity to do a show, even though the piece that I had put in originally into the gallery was a photograph, I didn't think I was going to do photography. I really wanted to do a set of wire sculptures. At the time, unfortunately, I wasn't able to build the work that I needed. And so I kind of fell back onto my photography. But that in and of itself was such a beautiful experience because I centered the show around my father and my grandfather and their relationship. And then kind of my found photos that I had taken through the years that kind of expressed a little bit about what I had explored in my thesis of home, belonging, and identity and what that meant for me. And
Yeah.
then I expanded on that as I then decided to build a whole set of wire sculptures, kind of with the same theme.
No, I just want to touch upon something before we move forward that ties some of the things that you said together. And in our initial conversation, you said, what is ethnicity without culture and what is culture without community? And I feel like that could have been something that we discussed before you told us about how all of these connections came together. But it really is a nice, of connecting to your Hungarian heritage, meeting your cousins, meeting artists in Hungary and family in Hungary because you were yearning for that connection and the culture. And it seems that your art and has brought that all together for you.
Yes, when I was writing my thesis, I was writing about my disconnection to my cultures and both the Hispanic side and the Hungarian side. And I was kind of trying to drill down to like what is the heart of feeling connected? What is it that defines a person's ethnicity outside of like DNA or,
Right.
like knowing that your ancestors came from somewhere.
Right.
Because in college, I was surrounded by this diversity, and the diversity had culture, and they knew who they were because
Right.
of the culture, but the culture was kept alive through the community, and I didn't have community. I didn't have community
Right.
in Hungarian culture. And so I started trying to build that in college. Like I talked about, I lived in Vancouver, Canada for a little bit, and I
Right.
went to a Hungarian Catholic church there because I wanted to not only learn more about the language, I wanted to learn more about the culture because I had been raised with like these, but I was raised with the kolocha doilies, and my
Right.
grandmother had sent for these custom Hungarian dancing shoes to be made for me, like
Uh-huh.
center an outline of my foot when I was 14. And so now I have like 3 of them, and she sent me like the vest with the matio on it. And so she made sure I had these touch points beyond kind of some of those visuals.
Hmm.
I had items, but I didn't have people. I had my dad, but he was, trying to assimilate more. So
That's a really important thing that a lot of people, because I've spoken to a lot of people just about this topic, is that your connection can mean something different. Like connection can mean something different to each
Mhm.
person because of community and location. You don't have the opportunity to be surrounded by a Hungarian community or a larger community with, a club and all those things. You have to look for your connection and your community in other places. So if you don't do it for yourself and make that effort, then you're never going to feel that sense of community. And not that it's a problem, but I feel like people like myself who we have the luxury of community near us. People don't realize that it's a luxury that you can attend a festival or just attend a performance, go see someone's art exhibition, such as your art exhibition. So that's hard for people that don't live near Hungarian communities. So I feel like what you're saying is really important because a lot of people, I believe, feel that way as well. So I feel like it's good for them to hear that other people feel that way too, because that's how we become more connected.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
had one friend growing up who she was part Hungarian like me, and I think, like, her grandmother's father had been from Hungary, and so we would, like, hold on to that connection, and I think they
Yeah.
had, like, an item that had come from Hungary in her
Mhm.
grandmother's house, and so we just, like, held on to the little bits.
Sure.
Like, it was almost like there had been a fire
Yeah.
and, everything is destroyed, but you save, like, 1 or 2 items, and then that is, like, all you have from that
It's a great
item.
analogy. Yeah.
And so we just, like, clung to that, and as I got older, I was luckily able to expand on that as I became an adult and, had my own
Right.
job, my own money, and could travel and things like
Sure.
that.
Yeah,
So,
that's
yeah.
fantastic. Now you're at this place, or you were at this place where you started to feel a little bit more of a community connection. So your art, your Hungarian heritage, your opportunities were all coming together, they're converging. So your current works are made from wire, which it's amazing. The wire is not a new thing for you because you've touched upon it throughout your time. So tell us where that started for you and what it
Yeah.
has developed into now.
My first wire sculpture was done for a class in college, and I loved it. It was a lot of fun, but I never really did anything with it. In fact, I remember a story where I remember a moment where I wanted to throw the piece away actually, and my dad was like, "No, I wanna keep it." And it was, like, all dusty and, like, it'd been in the garage for years. And then I started making wire jewelry, and I wanted to expand into wire sculpture. So when I came out here and I got my studio at the gallery, I wanted to do a whole gallery show of wire sculpture here, and there was another group show and I could submit a piece, and I decided to do a piece that represented, like, Kolocha. And I found the design for it and I did it one night. I think it took me like 2 hours and it wasn't that complicated. And I was like, I really love this. I put it in the gallery show, it's accepted. And the night that it opened, it didn't sell, but the night that that gallery show opened, something just clicked. And I had a moment where I was like, this is what I want to do. This is the medium. This is the subject matter. I really want to explore my Hungarian heritage through this medium of wire. And so I emailed a bunch of Hungarian American organizations, just cold emailed them. It was like the night of the gallery, it was like midnight. And I'm just Googling
Yeah.
Hungarian American organizations in the United States and sending off these kind of just like, hey, do you have like grant money for a Hungarian American artist exploring her heritage? I didn't even really explain anything. I had also, at that time, I still would love to do a documentary on István Orosz of the DOPP and some of the other members. And so I was also kind of putting that, I was like, I also have this connection to Hungary.
Right.
And is there any like money out there for me? There was just everyone was very encouraging. They wrote me back and they were like, "Hey, we don't have money right now, but look here," or
Right.
"Look, come back in the summer," or "Tell us more about your art." And then I got an email from the American Hungarian Foundation in New Brunswick, New Jersey. They said, "We don't have grant money, but we have gallery space and we'd like to see your work." And so I was in class when I opened the email and I screamed. And my students were like, "What? What is it?" And I was like, I think I might have just like gotten a
Yeah.
gallery show. So I quickly pulled together a piece. I had that one piece that I had created previously. I pulled together photographs of it, and then I quickly over the weekend did another wire sculpture. And then I also pulled together like a portfolio of my photography from Hungary, and I submitted both projects. One that was done.
To say that when you say I quickly pulled together some more wire pieces, that's amazing because when you see these wire pieces, I don't know how that could have been done quickly because they're so beautiful. So that's so funny that you said I quickly put them together.
Well, the piece that
You're so good at
the
that.
piece I pulled together is not in the show. It is hanging on my mom's living room because we actually drove it out and it just like it wasn't
Right,
it just didn't work.
right. Sure, sure.
So, no, yeah, it was crazy. I spent like all day building it. I was not expecting it to take so long. That was the naivety of the whole thing, was that I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know because I had done like a small piece for the gallery and it for the gallery here, and it was, it took 2 hours. And then I'm trying to do like a big piece, and I'm like, "Why isn't it taking 2 hours? This was so
Right.
easy before."
Yeah.
So I'm just like, that was the whole like, yeah, I was so naive.
It happens sometimes when
Yeah,
you're because you were probably excited as
I
well.
was
So
so excited.
yeah.
Yeah,
Oh, and you mentioned when we first talked, that you basically built a visual diary of your
yeah.
experiences with your Hungarian heritage and your connection, and that's how this whole art exhibit really came about. So, congratulations on that because like I said, I have the luxury of being able to see it often. So if anybody lives in the area, they should definitely come out and I'll leave that information in the show notes. But your wired collection has both Hungarian meaning, but also personal family Hungarian meaning. So let's talk about some of those pieces and what they represent that are hanging in the gallery.
I created a collection of 28 original pieces, and they all have very deep meaning to me personally in my personal experience as a Hungarian American, from my interests to my connection with my grandparents to my connection with my cousins and places that I've been in Hungary. When Melissa originally told me, "Hey, we want the wire sculptures and you have 10 months to build them." Yeah, what I was like, 10 months?
Well,
Yeah. And then, I still had to teach during that time. And so I started building in January of 2024, and it took me it took me 4 months to build the first piece.
okay.
Then I built everything else in 2 months. So it was
Wow.
insane.
To get over that hump of like where your brain was going with all of your designs, right?
Yeah, and as I was working on them, they changed also. Like it was changing up until the very last. But I knew that I wanted certain things to be honored and displayed and showcased.
Right.
And so there's different, I think, smaller collections within the larger collection. We've got a set of playing cards that feature prominent Hungarian figures throughout
Mhm.
history, from the first king, um,
I think you have Harry Houdini, right?
Harry Houdini.
Yeah.
Yes. So I did the 4 face cards. I did the king, I did Cece as the
Yeah.
queen, I did Harry Houdini as the joker, and I did Franz Liszt as the jack card because he
Right.
was Hungary's little prince. And so these were all also figures that I grew up knowing about. My father was always telling me that Harry Houdini was Hungarian, and I always knew that Franz Liszt was Hungarian. And I was reading a book about Cece recently, and one of my friends in Hungary, she's a museum curator, and she worked on an exhibit all about Cece in Jula, the town that my dad is from. So I had all these little connections, and then I have a collection of kolocha pieces, and those are taken from doilies that my parents were given as a wedding gift from Hungarian friends and family. And then I have my grandparents in the show, the two people that, shared the Hungarian heritage with me the most as a child. And then in honor of that time with them, I also have a collection of vegetables, the vegetables that we grew together when I was little, and that all Hungarians are very familiar with and love,
Yeah.
cucumbers, peppers, tomatoes. That has a very, very deep connection to also my family and their survival during both World War II and communism and the many Soviet invasions that they experienced during those years. And then there's a series of abstract faces that kind of tap into me as an artist, just exploring with the motifs of Kolocha and Mateo specifically, and also taking a little inspiration from other artists. So I also have a collection of abstract faces, and one of my favorite types of art is abstraction.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to break the Kolocha and the Mateo motifs down to their basic elements and then rework them as faces. And so you've got like the rose petals as hair on one piece, and you've got, I think, a tulip as a nose on another piece. And so I just had a lot of fun with that. And then I have some other pieces that just explore my own personal connection I have, and I'm going to butcher this name, Robert Berni. His piece, The Cellist, that hangs in the National Art Gallery in Budapest. I used to play the cello as a child. I love the cello. It's my favorite instrument. And so I recreated the girl playing the cello from that piece in wire. I also have a Pumi. Love my Pumi. I have her in the show. I reimagined some Mateo with like bones. You know how we have the tulips? And so instead of like the arch in the middle, it's a bone.
That is an interesting connection that you reimagined it. And that's a great way to say it, because anyone that is familiar with Matteo and Hungarian embroidery might know that from region to region, those patterns of flowers, they change. So there's no one correct way for there to be Hungarian patterns. People might have an affinity for a certain style because that's where their Hungarian heritage is from. Many people might not know that it does change from region to region, the colors, the flowers, the shapes. So basically, you are taking your experience and creating your own Hungarian embroidery pattern that reflects your Hungarian heritage and your experiences, which is pretty cool. So you created your own.
One of my favorite pieces along those lines is the main piece in the show that sits on the most prominent wall in the gallery. It's the biggest piece, and it's flanked by the 4 face cards on either side. And that one is named after my cousin, Angela. And that piece is probably the most perfect representation of what we were just talking about. I created this from a drawing that I had done that was in a different gallery show back here in Nebraska, where I had created pieces and named them after female family members. Because if you look into the history of Kolocha and these traditional folk designs, they have a strong affinity to the feminine and representing just the feminine essence and obviously embroidery is done predominantly by women. And so I wanted to kind of honor my family members and created pieces unique and named them after them. And so I loved that piece so much, and I wanted to make it bigger. It was a piece that I had drawn and done marker and pencil. And so in creating this piece, I drew from both Matteo and Kolocha predominantly, but it's not either one. And it was, in a sense, all of these other pieces where I drew strictly from, a painting, or I drew strictly from actual doilies, or, peppers, or like a photo of my grandparents. And this piece wasn't as abstract as the faces, but it was kind of the key. If this was a thesis, if this was my grad school thesis, this would be the thesis sentence, the thesis statement, this piece called Angela. And it is because it draws from them, but it's reimagined by me. And it took a little bit of courage to be able to do that, because when you don't feel connected to your ethnicity or your culture, or you don't have a community, you already don't feel like you have the authority to speak or to do or to be Hungarian or to be whatever culture or whatever ethnicity you are, because you're just like, who am I? Like, all these people are more connected. I don't speak the language, Yes, I can pronounce some words really well, but that doesn't mean much.
Yeah.
And
Well, that
so
was well said. I like how you used the word authority, because I feel like that's how we feel about ourselves sometimes. Like, who are we to take that risk, right? But it's great that you did take the risk. to do that?
I wanted to really showcase that this piece for me showcases that I am owning my Hungarian ethnicity as mine and
Mhm.
saying, I am Hungarian and what I create is therefore Hungarian. I'm drawing on these themes, I'm honoring these themes, but I get to also create Hungarian art, original Hungarian art. I get to create original Hungarian folk art.
Of course.
And so this piece is kind of like my thesis of like, this is, these are all the proofs that I know enough of who I am and I know enough of where I come from that I can then now create something original within that space and it be authentic and it be real and it be Hungarian.
And feel comfortable doing so
Mhm.
because you feel that connection. Because you also said that in addition to documenting your heritage along the way, that the pieces that you were documenting showed that you had the culture, which
Mhm.
represented the stronger community. And I
Yes.
feel like, it's just as if an author that writes the book and then comes up
Mhm.
with the title at the end,
Ye-
you know?
Yes.
It's like maybe you had to do all the proofs before you actually
Yeah.
got to the thesis statement. So
That
things
is
work in a different direction.
Yeah, that is kind of how it came about. Like, I had to be like, okay, I know that I'm Hungarian, and therefore I am going, because I really had to pull from these little bits of culture that I had and
Right.
say, these little bits are enough.
Yeah.
And because I told myself and I chose to believe that they were enough, the community then surrounded me.
I feel that that's such a powerful thing that you just said is that you felt that those pieces were enough. And that really hits home, I believe, for myself, for a lot of people that are searching and have always been searching to how do I identify
Mhm.
myself, my heritage? How do I preserve my
Mhm.
heritage? And you're doing that through creating new pieces, which is
Mhm.
pretty fantastic. And that's exactly like the topics of conversations that are happening now as the years go on. And thank goodness, it's not like we have waves of immigration from Hungary due to a political or wartime
Right.
situation. So the further away we move from that, the more people like ourselves and people out there that might not be 100% Hungarian, but they
Mhm.
want to feel that connection. They want to feel the community, feel the culture. And hopefully, I'm sure that a lot of people are going to feel really inspired by the risks that you took. It's not just with your beautiful art, which we will get back to, but just the risks you took with, connecting with people like in the church in Vancouver, visiting Hungary, sitting your Shiva for your dad in Hungary after he passed. Those were all risks that you took that helped you pave that path towards your
Yeah.
culture and connect all the things. I feel like it's like all the little sprinkles came down for you, and you're going forward. Now, I think it would be terrible if we didn't discuss the vegetable wire pieces before we move forward, because
Yeah.
even though they might look like the simplest pieces, they
Mhm.
have the biggest meaning, I think, to you and your families. Tell us
Yeah.
about those wired pieces
Yeah.
with the vegetables.
The cucumber is probably the one that has the deepest meaning. When I was in grad school writing my thesis, which ended up being a memoir of home belonging and identity as a third culture kid raised in the South, I was interviewing my dad, which is such a special thing now because he passed away shortly after I graduated. And I have these recordings. And one of the stories he told me that I wrote, it's not in my thesis, but it was a essay that I submitted during grad school, was about a time between World War II and the Revolution where, because it was common for many Soviet invasions to take place during that time. So this happened right after World War II, and it was during the winter. And Soviet soldiers were marching through. They were coming in through the east, obviously, and that's where my family is located in Jula. And, as we see today, war is a terrible thing and it hurts a lot of people and it devastates families and people die. I mean, that's the
Yeah.
reality of it. And it's, terribly frightening experience. And so they were coming through, they stopped at my family's home, and this was right before Christmas. And instead of being afraid, fear I'm sure they were afraid, but instead of hiding, they opened the door. And as my father tells the story, they opened the door and they welcomed the soldiers in and they said, essentially, we're having cucumber salad. Would you like some? My family was a gardening family, and they didn't just garden outside in the spring to fall, but they garden in greenhouses year round. And so they had cucumbers growing in their heated greenhouses in December, and they were making cucumber salad. And everyone who is from Eastern Europe knows cucumber salad is huge.
It is huge and delicious. And delicious.
Yes. And for the soldiers who had just been marching from, presumably Russia
Right.
for months, my father said, this was like better than gold for them. Fresh cucumber salad. And so the story goes that they taught my family how to make it the Russian way, and that's how we make it today. And instead of hurting my family, they ended up protecting my family, and my family provided food to them. And so that is one way that food that we grew protected us. And then another way was during communism, when farms were taken away. My family lost their farms, but they were able to keep the acreage, the 5 acres or 3 Hungarian acres that their house was on. And that was enough for them. And they built greenhouses and they heated them and they extended the growing period. And their food, they guaranteed their food. And so like if somebody had an issue with it, they would replace it. And they grew some of the best food in the community, to the point where my grandfather was even offered a job to go run one of the farms, the government farms. And he ended up turning that down because he was like, no, I'm good. I'm good with my 3 acres.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it gave him a little bit more freedom.
Right.
And so food, the ability to grow food, the ability to, I'm like going to get emotional talking about it.
You're allowed to.
The connection to the ground is so deeply important to my family.
Listen,
And,
you are allowed to feel those emotions.
yeah.
Because what they did for a living, which was growing vegetables, is what essentially saved their lives.
Yeah, it allowed family to have a little bit more freedom and a little bit more money and
Or protection.
a little bit more protection. And what is so incredibly special with that is that the last project that my father and I did before he passed away was we grew wildflowers together. I'd always wanted to have a flower farm because my grandmother had grown lots and lots of flowers. She had sold flowers in Hungary. That was part of the farm. That was like, she helped with all of it, but that was like her thing. And so I always wanted to have a flower farm to honor her. And one day I will. And there was a time when I was in grad school and it was during COVID and we didn't know what the world was going to be like afterwards. And so I was like, my dad and I were talking and we bought a tractor together and we lived on 5 acres.
Yeah.
And we were like, hey, let's do this. We know how to do this. Let's do it.
Yeah.
And so the last project we did together was we grew a field of wildflowers. And when I moved out here, I picked a bouquet and I gave it to him. And I have a photo of the bouquet sitting beneath a picture of my grandparents on their wedding day. And it's kind of like this little...
It's like an homage to like your family and your heritage and the livelihood that they lived and continued with the vegetables. So, I know that many people will come to see your work at the gallery at the American Hungarian Foundation. And it's so interesting to know that story because I feel like it is those pieces, like a wired piece of vegetable seems simple, but it has the biggest meaning.
Oh, yeah. It's how I got here.
Yeah, exactly.
I wouldn't be here without those vegetables.
Exactly. And I have to say, which we didn't mention yet, or I didn't mention yet, the wire pieces themselves, and I feel like I used this term in our email, they're buttery smooth. And, you're an artist. So clearly that's why you are an artist, is because you're able to craft these pictures and these drawings in wire form. It's amazing because anyone out there that's listening knows that you can't even get a paper clip back in the right original form once you bend it. So, these pictures that you've created from wire form, it's just amazing to me how you do that because they're just so I don't know, they're just so beautifully done. And I'm sure that your hands probably were a little tired after you created this collection for the gallery.
Yes, there was a time for anybody that goes and they see the piece Mocha the Pumi.
Oh my-
Yeah,
Yes.
where it's all the curls from the
Yeah.
Pumi.
Yeah.
I did that piece in the middle of the collection. It was one of the
Right.
the middle pieces that I did. And it took about 8 hours to bend all the wire. And I'm using an annealed steel wire. It's a very hard wire. It is fired. And because it's fired, and I'm not a chemist, I don't understand the science,
Okay.
but it makes the wire be more malleable and less prone to breakage, but it also makes it a little harder or a little, harder to bend. I don't know how else to describe it. And so I'm just like going back and forth with all these curls. And I injured my thumbs in the process so badly that they actually didn't stop hurting for about 3 months. And I still had to build the rest of my pieces. And there was a point where I wasn't sure if I was going to get the show done. And I had 3 weeks before I had to drive the show to New Jersey.
Oh my goodness.
And so I switched to an aluminum wire for a couple pieces. So there's like a bouquet piece that is also an homage to my grandmother.
Yeah.
And then there's a blouse that, everyone who's Hungarian has seen the
Sure.
blouses with the
Yeah.
kolocha.
Yeah.
And so there's a blouse and there's a bouquet. And those are, I think, the two pieces that are in the aluminum wire because my thumbs hurt so much that I
My
could
thumb
not.
hurt thinking about what you did.
But I still had to keep working. That was the
Right.
thing. Like, I couldn't stop. There was
Right.
no stopping allowed.
Right.
And so I was like, well, we have to get this done. And there was a
Exactly.
point where I didn't want to build everything in the aluminum because it's not as sturdy. And so I would tape my thumbs with Band-Aids and I would sleep with wristbands, not wristbands. I would sleep with
Wrist guards.
wrist guards. Yeah.
Yeah.
Whatever they're called. I slept with those. I wore them while I was building. It was an endeavor for sure. And my thumbs, they did not stop hurting until probably right before my gallery show opened, which was like 3 months later.
Yeah. That's crazy. You really suffered for this, which I feel like is so artistic, right? A true artist suffering from them.
Also, the wire was poking my fingers because I would wrap pieces with like a really thin wire. And so that I was like bleeding. My thumbs were aching. The annealed steel has like soot all over it. So my hands were like all dirty. It was like, it was, it was not, I'm not gonna, like, it was not fun.
You know what? But you know what? It produced something beautiful and representative.
It was worth it.
Of your culture. So I feel like you've gone from longing to discovering to maintaining and preserving your Hungarian heritage. And this gallery of work that you produced really is like the culmination of that. So what's next? I'm sure you want to take a break from bending wire for a little while, but what's next in your artist's vision? What's happening for you?
Yeah. So a couple things are happening.
Okay.
I'm always thinking of like what's next. And even when I was creating this whole body of work, I literally created 2 bodies of work last summer. One was a photography show that ended up being here, and then one was the wires that went out. And I had a gallery show that was, I had in October, 2 opened in October, one here in Nebraska, and obviously the one and so I had to have 2 bodies of work. And so, that was fun. But what's next? I'm going to keep exploring my Hungarian heritage. That's never going to stop. And one of the ways that I want to do this, that I dabbled with a little bit last spring, was I love the cello. A couple years ago, I just started sketching cellos at different angles, and I love kolocha and matio. And so I've been doing some acrylic paintings using those motifs and like putting them together. And one of those pieces sold last summer, which I was really thrilled about. And so that's something I'm going to do. I'm a writer. And so I would like to, work on getting published now as a writer. Some of the work, I did a lot of pieces on grief right after my dad died, small prose pieces, longer pieces, some poetry, things like that. And so and I went out right before I went out. I had a lot of friends come to New Jersey for the opening. And I gave one of them this it's kind of like a zine. I don't know if everyone's familiar with zines, but they're like mini magazines, but they're just like made out of folded paper.
Yeah.
And so I made something similar to that. It wasn't quite an authentic
Mhm.
zine with just like a collection of sad poetry. So it had to do with just like, my grief journey and then the grief journey that I've witnessed in others. I took a poetry workshop last summer in the middle of building my wire
Mhm.
sculptures and also, doing that other show of photography. I also was doing a poetry workshop because why not?
I feel like the more that we can do to just expand like our knowledge and even just whatever it is that we're interested in, like
Mhm.
art or, reading or whatever it is people have, in their sights, in their vision, it's important to keep exploring all the opportunities
Yeah.
because you never know where it's going to lead.
Yeah.
If you had asked me like 5 years ago, if I was going to have a podcast, I'd say, you're crazy. You're crazy. So you never know where your inspiration
Yeah.
that you're going to draw it from. And it's great to hear that you're going to continue, maybe not with the wire right away, but with exploring your Hungarian heritage. And there's so many connections now that you've made that you've really built a community for yourself. And now you're part of our community here on the podcast. So I think, and I don't want any credit for this, but I feel like you should take your Hungarian wired art pieces and make like a coffee table book from them. Because I
I
think
would love to do
they're
that.
they're beautiful. And especially, you have some stories connected to them. Those would be a great way to share that with people as well. So if you do end up doing that, I would love to see it and obviously talk about it here on the podcast.
Yeah, maybe I'll do that. One of the things to
Cool.
answer the previous question that you asked, Paula Scheer, who is one of my graphic design heroes, she said in a documentary on Netflix that you can't have creativity without play. You have to be in a state of play to be creative. And I think that that is the phase that I'm in right now. Before any big project begins, like I was definitely not in a state of play while building the wire
Right.
sculptures. However,
Right.
when I came up with the idea and planned it all out, I was definitely in a state of play. And then you have to get down to work and you have to build. So I feel like right now I'm definitely in a state of play mentally
Mhm.
where I'm like just exploring and having fun and being like,
Mhm.
what is the next iteration of my Hungarian heritage? I've
Right.
explored home belonging and identity in like three
Mhm.
different forms
Yeah.
now, through photography and wire and obviously on paper. What is,
What's
maybe the
next, right?
next
What's the
thing?
next avenue?
Yeah, what is the next theme
Yeah.
that I want to explore and through what medium?
Leaving it
Yeah.
open to through the play, and I have to say that resonates with me as a person so much because sometimes we get caught up in life and the things that we're doing, and when I need to be creative, for example, with the podcast or some other things that I'm involved with at the American Hungarian Foundation, I need to do some creative things around the house. I need that play for my brain to go back to working on things. Not that they're separate necessarily, but
Mhm.
my brain needs that release in the play to make other things happen. So I resonate with that so much, and that's a really great thing that you brought up. But that's great. I'm gonna think about that a lot now. So I'm excited to find out what comes next, and I'm excited to stay connected, which I know we will, because once you're a guest on the podcast, you're a friend. So we're gonna let people know in the show notes how they can see your art collection at the American Hungarian Foundation. And I'm sure that Suzanne is going to give us some ways that you can reach out to her if you have questions about purchasing some of her artwork, not just in New Brunswick, New Jersey, but over in Nebraska, and how they could be purchased maybe online if people don't live in those areas, and or how they can just reach out to you to talk to you just about your art or your Hungarian heritage, right? About your art, your Hungarian heritage. There's just so much. And I just really appreciate the conversation that we had. And I appreciate your friendship. And I look forward to this next avenue that whatever it is, that whatever it's going to be, I'm here for it. And I'm excited to see it. So before we say goodbye today, if you're interested in not only seeing Suzanne's work, in June, the first Saturday of June is always the Hungarian Festival in New Brunswick, New Jersey, and you'll be able to meet Suzanne in person at that festival. And it's a very well attended festival. So if you were already planning on going, make sure that you make it to the American Hungarian Foundation, 300 Somerset Street, so that you can meet Suzanne and see all of the art pieces. You will not be sad because they're so beautiful. So I look forward to seeing you in June. at the festival, and hopefully everyone else will come out as well. Why don't you tell the listeners how they can contact you?
Yes. The best way to contact me is probably on Instagram right now. I'm working on my website. It is there and you can find me there. But the best way is probably on Instagram. It is at Suzanne Ócsai. That is SUZ. Send me a message, DM me. My email address is the same. Feel free to reach out through email if you'd like to. It is also Suzanne Ócsai, SUZANNEOCSAI @gmail.com. My website is also the same. It is under construction and it will say that when you get there, but it is also just my name. .com.
Suzanne, thank you so much for being here on the Hungarian Heritage Podcast, for giving us such a robust episode about your heritage and your art. Thanks so much for being here today.
It was a pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Of course. Thanks for joining me on this episode of the Hungarian Heritage Podcast, with a special thanks to my talented guest, Suzanne Ócsai, for sharing all about her Hungarian heritage and for sharing about her continued quest to feel connected to her Hungarian community. If you're interested in seeing Suzanne's Hungarian wired art collection that is currently on display at the American Hungarian Foundation in New Brunswick, New Jersey, her collection will be there until June. You can view the collection during one of the upcoming events being held at the American Hungarian Foundation or by calling AHF to schedule a visit. If you're interested in seeing the collection and meeting Suzanne, then make sure you attend the Hungarian Festival on June 6, 2026. All of this information will be listed in the show notes, as well as Suzanne's website and social media information, so you can contact her and give her a follow. If you have feedback or questions about this episode, or you would like to connect with me at the podcast, you will also find that information in the show notes. If you've enjoyed this episode and you're interested in learning more about this Hungarian heritage community, please do not hesitate to reach out. I would love to hear from you. Our theme music is Hungarian Dance by Pony Music, used with special license from Envato Market. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen to your podcasts. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, make sure you stay Hungarian heritage strong. Sziasztok!